welcome, and what a great crowd for a great occasion. And this is a sentimental one for me, honestly. Charlie, first of all, is a very dear friend, so that makes it sentimental. Another thing that makes it sentimental is that there is a deep psychic connection between Longwood and where Charlie began his career as a history professor in 1972, and Emory and Henry College, where Charlie was subsequently president for a great number of years. Joseph Jarman, a name that many of you may recall, who was the president of Longwood for a remarkable 44 years, from 1902 to 1946. He was an Emory and Henry product. And where we sit this hot second, named after Fred Weigel, that also is an Emory and Henry connection. Charlie was just telling me that Fred was a 1927 graduate of Emory and Henry before he came to Longwood. It's also sentimental because Charlie is one of the quite few people outside of family who knew my grandfather, Taylor Ely II, well, knows my dad well, and knows me well. So, the stories he could tell if he wanted to. So, welcome, Charlie, very truly. And I will turn it over to Justin.
Good evening, I'm Justin Pope. I work in the President's office. Just a quick announcement, this is the second installment of the Longwood Leadership Forum. The next event will be Wednesday, March 12th with Meg Gruber of the Virginia Education Association, talking about the challenges and opportunities for today's public school educators. We hope to see many of you there. This evening I'm going to introduce Dr. Sydnor. He's going to speak for about 25 minutes or so, and we'll have a Q&A after that for about half an hour, and there will be a reception to which you're all welcome, encouraged to come in the Hager room right after. Our speaker tonight, Charlie Sydnor, is a familiar face to Longwood, and our occasion here tonight is a homecoming. From 1972 to 1980, he was a member of the Longwood faculty, teaching European history and Western civilization. But he didn't just teach about those Renaissance men, he was one. When I spoke to Dr. Sydnor earlier this week about his time here, it seemed like all he actually wanted to talk about was another title he held here at Longwood, which was the first assistant baseball coach in Lancer history. It was the first days of coeducation, and the baseball program was just being hastily assembled. And according to his friend and admirer, Coach Bowling, who I believe is here tonight, Dr. Sydnor had plenty on his plate, but could not resist the temptation to join the program. He loved coaching baseball so much that Coach Bowling's upcoming memoirs put it, he threw so much batting practice in the team's early days that he would show up to lectures smelling like liniment and Bengay muscle cream. The club team that Dr. Sydnor coached was 0-13 that first year and lost to Hampton-Sydney by the scores of 26-1 and 25-0. But in addition to his arm, he offered some historians' perspective and eloquence. Later, he compared the team to the scrappy band of Scottish freedom fighters chronicled in the movie Braveheart. Doomed at the outset, he wrote, and quote, fated to be crushed in every game because we could not possibly best our opponent in skill, strength, experience, or command of resources. But we went out game after game and tried, able to summon only the strength that comes from that purest chamber in the heart where both courage and character live. A year later, Longwood beat Hampton-Sydney 8-7, and 3 years after that, Longwood was playing in the Division II College World Series. He was truly, if I may switch continents with the history metaphors, one of the founding fathers of our successful, now Division I baseball program. But enough about baseball. Charlie Sydnor, as President Reevely mentioned, graduated from Emory Henry in 1965, received his PhD from Vanderbilt in 1971. His teaching career at Longwood overlapped with the emergence of a distinguished career in television, working on documentaries, and the start of a long-time relationship with Virginia Public Television, where I'm sure many of you have seen him appear. After a stint as a special assistant to the president of Hampton-Sydney in the early 1980s, he moved to Richmond to work for Governor Chuck Robb. And from there, was back to his alma mater at Emory and Henry, where he served as president from 1984 to 1992. And then for 14 years back to television, heading Commonwealth Public Broadcasting Corporation and its 5 public television stations. Along the way, he has also become a prominent expert on the Holocaust, testifying in civil lawsuits brought against Nazi war criminals. He's currently at work on 2 books that reflect the range of his interests, a memoir of college called The Catcher Speaks German, and a biography of Reinhard Heydrich, one of the most vicious Nazi architects of the Holocaust. As an old history major myself, I was heartened when Dr. Sydnor summed up his career thusly: "I've had 7 careers, and history figured in all of them." To any Longwood history students here tonight, he offers a good example of how the skills you learn studying history, assembling evidence, weighing it, synthesizing it into an argument, and then persuading others that your argument is the best one, those skills are valuable in the workplace and in the world. That said, it is the position he has held since last summer as president and executive director of the Virginia Holocaust Museum, where he wrestles with the challenges of history and historical education at their rawest, most powerful, and most essential. He will be telling you more about that work tonight in his talk titled "The Virginia Holocaust Museum, Teaching the Nazi Genocide as Local History." Please join me in welcoming back to Longwood, a place I hope he still considers among his many homes, Dr. Charlie Sydnor.
I'm going to say here again, because I feel it, what I said to the class of very bright, inquisitive young people I had the good fortune to spend an hour and a half with this afternoon. I'm now 70 years old, and a long time ago I got used to not having butterflies before public speeches or public appearances or anything else, but I had about as bad a case of the butterflies this afternoon as I've had in a long time, facing that room full of undergraduates, all of whom look sharp enough to dissect the best historical argument with even a dull intellectual razor. And that collection of butterflies is even bigger tonight, looking out here in the audience and seeing faces that I've known and been friends with for not just years, but decades. The first time I spoke in this building was in the fall of 1975. It was a relatively new building then. It's been well taken care of in the decades since. But I was about to experience the publication of what had been a PhD dissertation as a monograph dealing with a subject that I had a much more restricted and narrow perspective on then than became the case. The subject grew in dimension much beyond anything that I had imagined it would be. Of course, I would always nod knowingly and try to affect some wise look when people said they thought it was really brilliant that I had figured all this out way back then and knew that this was going to be the important centerpiece of where historical inquiry into the National Socialist period of German history was going to go. I spent 8 of the best, happiest, most productive, engaging, inspiring years of my professional life on this campus. I started a career here, and in a real sense, I owe almost all of what has happened in the decades since I left in the spring of 1980 to the experiences I had here and to the people who were my colleagues here at the time, a number of whom are here tonight. I'm a little upset to see that you all are deteriorating like you are when I continue to look exactly like I looked in 1974, 1975. Bill Harbour was even reminding me at dinner about his terrified frame of mind when he was interviewed for the job here by me and Jimmy Helms, and who was the third one? Marshall Hall, and I could not imagine three less terrifying people in the way of anything. I think what really propelled and multiplied the interests that I developed was the sense of active engagement by faculty and students here in the 1970s. This was a very vibrant place. People not only discussed things, they argued with each other. And it was not the kind of argument that had people who disagreed didn't end up being disagreeably inclined toward each other, unless, of course, it was something on the subject of faculty politics of some kind. I remember that the great controversy of one fall was the attempt by the administration to shut down the tea room, the faculty tea room, which we considered to be a sub rosa plot to stifle free expression and discussion among the faculty who gathered there to waste a lot of time talking about things that probably didn't matter in the first place. I think it was Robert Maynard Hutchins, the great president of the University of Chicago, who once remarked that the reason that college faculty meetings were so long, so noisy, so intractable, frustrating, disagreeable, and dispiriting was because the stakes were so low. In any event, I owe a lot to this place, an awful lot to this place, and it's an honor to be asked to come back and talk about something that I've had a chance to do now at the end of my career that for me helps to make, looking backward, helps to make sense even more strongly about everything that's come before. And that is to be asked, as someone who knows absolutely nothing about running a museum, to come back and be responsible for the Virginia Holocaust Museum in Richmond. Now, many people say that the last thing anybody would expect to find in Richmond, Virginia would be a Holocaust museum. In Richmond, you expect to find the great bronze statues, the great equestrian statues of the Civil War figures that are on Monument Avenue. You expect to find the Jefferson Hotel. You expect to find the State Capitol, Main Street Station, Byrd Park, all of the things that sort of fit into the image of a city that was a big part of American history and the centerpiece of the Civil War. But what you don't expect to find is a museum that is dedicated solely to commemorating and teaching aspects of what was the greatest crime undertaken in human history. The deliberate effort undertaken by a great modern industrial state, a nation of academic achievement, cultural advancement, scientific renown, and wonder and leadership in almost every positive field of human endeavor that mattered in the 19th and early 20th centuries. A nation that had achieved so much in so many areas to improve the condition and life of humankind. A deliberate effort by that nation to deploy its energies, its resources, and its capacities to the systematic murder of millions of human beings, men, women, and children. Not just Jews, who were considered by Adolf Hitler to be the scum of the earth, fit only for extermination, a racial blot upon the world that had been responsible, people who had been responsible for all of the misfortunes of humankind in the two preceding millennia. Not just the extermination of the European Jews, but of gypsies, of Jehovah's Witnesses, of recalcitrant members of the Catholic clergy, of the physically handicapped, of the mentally retarded, of acute alcoholics, of people who were chronically unemployable, people who did not fit into the stereotypical central casting vision of Aryan perfection that was Hitler's goal for a 1,000-year Reich that would combine genetic and racial perfection with an unrivaled system of military power that would dominate the Eurasian continent and eventually the world. One was not expect to find in Richmond, Virginia, a museum that's dedicated to commemorating how that nightmarish vision affected people at a local level. And that's exactly what the Virginia Holocaust Museum does. How many of you in the room have been to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C.? That's incredible. That's by far a majority of the people in the room. And I suspect that many of you have been on more than one occasion. It is one of the most important institutions built in the last century. And if there is anything that may help to insulate humankind against another such genocide undertaken by a great modern industrial state, it may be that museum in Washington. All that said, it is an enormous and overpowering place to go. It staggers you. There is so much there to see. It has grown so much in the 20-odd years since its dedication that this is probably one of the worst kept secrets in Washington, D.C. The staff of the museum have all been kicked out of the place. The historians and the administrative part of the staff are now in buildings a couple of blocks away from the museum because it's grown as people have continued to donate artifacts, books, journals, notes, other things that document the Holocaust have poured into that great place over the last 20 years, and they're literally bursting at the seams. In addition to everything else that documents the Holocaust in the documents left by the Nazi perpetrators, the records of the SS and police, what I call the paper methodology of mass murder, there are now probably 1 million photographs in the museum's collection taken from all over Eastern Europe that show how mass murder was conducted. All of that taken into consideration, for me, as someone who has been in and out of that museum a number of times and seen other memorials that are dedicated to the victims of the Holocaust, it's difficult to engage on an individual human level with what the experience of the Holocaust must have been like to its victims. And this is where I think more by accident and by coincidence and by good fortune, the museum in Richmond has succeeded in a way that strikes people powerfully when they come into the building. The museum is built around the experience of a single Jewish family, the Ip family, who were trapped upon the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June of 1941, living in the city of Kovno in Soviet-occupied Lithuania. They were in a part of Northern Europe that was quickly overrun by the German armies, and they could not escape. They were unable to flee into the interior of the Soviet Union, and therefore were caught in the trap, a trap that held millions of Jews all over Eastern Europe. They were subjected to the orderly, rationally calculated but nonetheless violent depredations that the Nazis unleashed upon their Jewish victims as part of occupation policy. All Jews were forced to register. All Jews were forced to create inventory declarations of their property, which was then to be expropriated by the Germans. The Jews in Kovno were forced into a single section of the city of Kovno where a Jewish ghetto was built. They had to build the ghetto themselves. As one survivor told me, rare has the instance been, except in Jewish history, when the prisoners have to build their own prisons. But this is what happened to the Jews of Kovno, as the Jews of Warsaw, Lodz, Białystok, Minsk, and other places. And having been ghettoized, they were then subject to periodic actions that were taken. The first big one in October of 1941, the registration of those who were fit for labor, and the separation of other Jews from professional classes, teachers, professors, bankers, doctors, lawyers, those who did not possess a physical skill that the Germans could use in maintaining their airports and roads and communications equipment, etc. All those of the professional classes were marched from Democracy Square in the middle of Kovno to the Ninth Fort, one of the ancient fortresses built around the city, and there, in a series of mass shootings, they were all murdered in the next 2 days, the first of a series of liquidations in the Kovno ghetto. All of this is documented in exhibits that show how the Ibsen family survived. Smuggling food in and out of the ghetto, an attempt to preserve cultural identity and sanity by having book clubs and reading groups, by having the children stage plays, by even recording to preserve a historical record of what was happening to them, even commissioning the history of what was going on at the time, not only in documents that described day by day what the Germans were doing, but photographs that illustrated what life in the Kovno ghetto was like. Mr. Ibsen, I'm using the Americanized name of the Ib family now, Mr. Ibsen, who had been a trained lawyer before the Second World War, was advised by a friend during the big selection on Democracy Square not to say that he was a lawyer, not to say that, to tell them that you are a carpenter, that you're a bricklayer, that you're a plumber, that you're a mason, that you're something. Don't tell them that you're a lawyer. Mr. Ibsen stepped up in front of the SS sergeant at the table with the typewriter and said, I am an auto mechanic. And when he said that, without realizing why in the world he said it, because he didn't know much about automobile mechanics, he was told to go to the right and take his family with him, and they returned home. They would survive. A German non-commissioned officer came to their house the next day and ordered him into the truck and took him out to the motor pool at the airport, the German Luftwaffe place outside Kovno, and said, there's a broken truck here, you need to fix it. We don't know what's wrong with it. Well, Mr. Ibsen didn't really have any idea what was wrong with the truck, but he got underneath and looked and determined that the differential gear was broken, and figured out that he needed some tools and a couple of different parts, which he was able to get out of the parts inventory, and he fixed the truck, more by luck and chance than anything else, convincing the German sergeant whom he had met on that day that he was indeed a mechanical genius. And from there on, Mr. Ibsen was permitted to work as an auto mechanic in this motor pool, and gradually he had the time to learn enough of auto mechanics to get by and to keep the Germans happy with what he was doing. Tipped off by the Jewish police in the ghetto in September of 1943 that there was to be another big cleansing of the ghetto, which was about to happen. The remaining 6,000 or 7,000 Jews in the ghetto were to be deported to Estonia, and there were to be worked to death in labor camps or else killed outright. Mr. Ibsen was warned by the same sergeant that a big ghetto action was coming, with the obvious implication that if he could get out of the ghetto and get his family out, he should do so. And he did. They got out on a moonless night, and with prearranged work done by a friend who was a farmer, Mr. Ibsen smuggled his wife and his son, Jay, out. The three of them made their way to a farm some miles distance from Kovno, and in a bunker that they had dug under a potato patch, the Ibsen family literally lived underground for the next 8 months until the Red Army overran and occupied Lithuania in the summer of 1944. And the museum documents all this. We're the only facility devoted to commemorating the history of the Holocaust that uses mannequins. We were pretty severely criticized for this when the museum opened by people who said, you know, this is supposed to be a museum and not a theme park. And this is supposed to be about the Holocaust and not about Disneyland. And our answer was, the primary audience for this museum are high school and middle school children. They are able to connect with history if it is demonstrated in a human form, unlike older and younger people do. And the formula has worked. And so you can see, the school children who come through there can see what the potato bunker looked like. It has been rebuilt exactly to its dimensions at the time. They can see what the partisan units looked like that occupied the forests in Lithuania and Belarus from the fall of 1943 on, and then they can see the experiences of murder, not just in the great death factories at Auschwitz, at Sobibor, at Majdanek, at Treblinka, at Chełmno. They can see how the Germans carried the Holocaust to make the murder, the annihilation of the European Jews, a local phenomenon. And to a great extent, I think we have prospects for succeeding in the future that other museums may not have, because we have understood where the next wave of historical scholarship is going in the history of the Holocaust, and that is to an examination of the Holocaust as local, of the Holocaust, of the history of the Holocaust as local history. The two most significant books that have been recently published in the field are by a very gifted young woman historian named Wendy Lower, who teaches at Claremont McKenna College in California. The title of the book is Hitler's Furies, German Women in the Nazi Killing Fields, 1941 to 1944. Professor Lower has opened up a field of inquiry that no one even imagined existed until she opened it. She has documented the presence of almost 500,000 young German women between the ages of 17 and about 38 who voluntarily went behind the German armies into Eastern Europe and served in the German occupation as receptionists, telephone operators, drivers, clerical assistants, cryptographers, people, young women who not only I'm thinking of the one young woman in a place in the Ukraine whose primary duty was to type the orders that were used to conduct the mass killings of Jews in that area. These were women who became perpetrators. And in several cases, Professor Lower has documented women with official German positions or official German titles who were part of the occupation administration who actually went out and murdered Jews themselves, who took part in the fun. In one community where there were no SS and police forces, and the German authority was imposed by second and third rate army divisions that were stationed in the rear area as occupation troops. In this area, in this community, in the wintertime, the German men liked to go hunting. Well, by 1942, none of the wild animals that had inhabited the forests of this area had survived. All the elk, the deer, the bear, the wild boar were all gone. So to hunt, the local worthies from the German army decided to hunt Jews instead of animals. And they literally would round up Jews, take them out into the countryside, turn them loose, tell them to run, give them an interval to get some distance away while they drank schnapps and anticipated the hunt. And then with their vehicles, their track vehicles, they would go across the snow and hunt the fleeing Jews as they would have hunted fleeing rabbits or boar or elk. The other book, published by a young man at 70, the pipes don't run as long as they used to at 35. The other recently published book by a young man named Waitman Bourne, who is a graduate of St. Christopher's School in Richmond and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He was a student of Christopher Browning's. Professor Bourne, who is now at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, has published a study of the activities of local army units, local units of the German army in rear areas of the occupied territories in Russia, and documented how individual groups, down to the level of platoons, individual groups of ordinary German soldiers, not SS, not Gestapo, not police, ordinary German soldiers, would, without orders and on their own initiative, undertake the killing of local communities of Jews. This is how the Holocaust worked in a sense that was not directed from the top down, but initiated from the bottom out and in all directions. And in one instance, in a small community near Novogrodek in Belarus, there was a shortage of German personnel to do the killing. So the local army commander who had authorized the mobilization of one company of soldiers to do the killing also asked for help from the local civilian administration. So the local mayor, the postmaster, the director of the local Nazi welfare organization, a couple of secretaries, a chauffeur, and some house servants were all issued weapons, and they all pitched in to kill the Jews as a kind of spontaneously organized community activity. This is how the Holocaust functioned at the local level. And this is the kind of thing you can see demonstrated in the museum in Richmond. The other thing that I think has underscored the importance of creating museums, not just a museum like ours, but creating museums, plural, in different places around the country that look at different aspects of the Holocaust, is the fact that we have created something that no one else has. We have recreated, literally, on an exact scale, the courtroom in the Palace of Justice at Nuremberg, where the major German war criminals were tried in 1945 and 1946. Looks exactly like the major courtroom did. And again, we've used mannequins as the subjects who were the major German war criminals. Goering, Hess, Dönitz, Rader, Kaltenbrunner, Frank, Frick, et al. And that has given us the ability to leverage exhibits around the back wall of that room, away from the courtroom. It has given us the leverage to develop exhibits that document how the United States and Great Britain on their own conducted other war crimes trials of lower level figures who carried out the orders of those who were the major Nazi war criminals. Finally, what's happening with us that I think points toward what I would call the permanent memorialization of the Holocaust as local history is the inundation of records that are coming to us. We are being given precious items from survivors of the Holocaust: accounts, journals, diaries, photographs, notebooks, things that were precious to people who managed to survive and who do not want these artifacts to be left indefinitely someplace where they will never encounter another human being and never serve a purpose of illustration or education. In addition, we are also the beneficiaries of two important collections of documents, government records that are, well, they're SS and police records, they're concentration camp records, they're records of the perpetrators that have come to the Virginia Holocaust Museum. And one of those collections is the collection of my documents and papers from the 25 years I worked as an expert witness with OSI and the Justice Department. All of that is now in the Virginia Holocaust Museum. And within the next 5 years, we anticipate that all of the existing records of OSI documenting all of the efforts at bringing Nazi war criminals to justice will be part of the permanent archive and collections of the Virginia Holocaust Museum. Last year, about 37,000 people came through the museum. We have a permanent staff of 11 people. We're open 7 days a week, Monday through Friday, 10 to 5, Saturday and Sunday, 11 to 5. There's no admission. Everything is free. We have 2 parking lots, and from now until May, most weekdays, those parking lots will be inhabited by at least one big yellow school bus. We have public schools from all over Virginia who bring their students to the museum. And the second week in March, for the first time ever, we are having the senior class of the Daniel Boone High School in Greenville, Tennessee, come all the way to Richmond to see the museum. They're going to see other things while they're in Richmond, but they're coming to see the museum. My purpose in all of this is to bring with me tonight a plea, and that is a plea for this institution to bring or to send its students to see what's in this building that is the Virginia Holocaust Museum. And hopefully what's there may incite some greater interest among those students who are already intrigued at the possibilities of study, not just for morbid curiosity, but for the very important didactic purpose of leaving warnings to the world of what happens when hatred becomes institutionalized as a political ideology and becomes the creed, the official political creed of a modern industrial state, this is what happens. This is the result, not the inevitable result, but the result that can happen. And if I can be permitted a word of a lapse of some self-indulgence and pride, I have never worked any place along the way that I have thought had a more urgent mission than the Virginia Holocaust Museum does, nor have I ever been privileged to work with a group of young people who are as inspired and as enthused and as determined and as focused and as relentless in pursuing the history of the Holocaust as are the young people who are the staff at this museum. I'm 70. Their average age is probably about 28. They are unusually tolerant when I lose my car keys or my iPhone, which is pretty frequently, and they become aware of it. Either the car keys or the iPhone or both somehow magically sort of reappear. Anyway, it is more than I can possibly express, an honor and a pleasure and a treat and a privilege to be invited back here and to stand again in this building where I first stood such a long time ago, and to walk among the buildings of this place, which for me have occupied a very magical place in my professional life. With that, I'll thank you, and if we have time for questions, I'll be glad to answer any that anybody has.
What, if anything, have you learned from the museum lens that has advanced your understanding or surprised you, or taught you something new that you didn't in all those other ways of looking at this?
Let me respond with two answers. The first, maybe a little lighthearted. After I had been working at the museum for about 3 months, a colleague of mine who is a retired chairman of the Department of History at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City called me and said, "So what's it like to be a museum director? How do you like running a museum?" And I said, "Well, you know, it's the most stress-free environment I've ever worked in. There's really not a lot of stress because the exhibits don't talk back to you, and you know, the photographs don't give you a lot of guff." I said, "The only thing that I could imagine that would possibly be less stressful than running a museum would be managing a funeral home. And, you know, hopefully it may be some time before I have to manage a funeral home." I think the most hopeful thing that I've seen, if you can look for a metaphor that you know, sort of illustrates something. Several months ago, we had a group of middle school children come in, and I think they were from Powhatan County. It was a class of maybe 30 or 40 kids, and they've driven in on the bus, and they've gotten off the bus, and they come in the building, and it's about 10:30 in the morning, and, you know, at that age, they're kind of fidgety, and they're kind of, you know, they're punching each other, and somebody's pulling somebody's shirt tail, and they're whispering and talking and doing that kind of thing. And they're only half listening to the docent who's going to take them on the tour through the exhibit. And they proceed from the lobby of the museum into the concentration camp exhibit. And that exhibit is a large wall that has been built to replicate the bunks that were in the prisoners and inmates' barracks in not just a concentration camp, but in the camps at Dachau, Sachsenhausen, Buchenwald, Mauthausen, Auschwitz. And they come into this room where you look at these mannequins that have been expertly created to resemble gaunt, famished, diseased, weakened prisoners. And they stand in there and they get real quiet. And from that point on, they really listen very carefully to what's said. So I think it is, in one sense, it's a sign that I did not expect to see, that young people will respond very, very sensitively to something like this if it is illustrated to them in a way that they can engage at their level. The other thing is the level of public interest. It is astounding at the extent to which the public, not just the American public, but the global public, has this insatiable appetite for knowledge of the Holocaust. And I don't mean the morbid curiosity of people who are looking for daggers and helmets and that sort of thing, but people who are genuinely interested in knowing, how did this happen? Who did this? How in the world did they manage to pull this off? Why did the world not react as it did? We have developed a very urgent series of programs. Next September, we're going to have a gentleman come up from Miami, Florida, named Herbert Karliner, Karliner. He was a 13-year-old German boy on the SS St. Louis, the ship that set out with 927 Jews from Hamburg in May of 1939, headed for Cuba, where the passengers had been promised refuge, sanctuary from the growing drumbeat of persecution in Germany. And of course, then the Cuban government reneged, even after they had all paid their money for the landing permits. And the poor captain, who by the way has been named by the state of Israel as one of the righteous among the nations for trying to save his passengers. They couldn't get into Havana. The captain wanted to take the ship into Miami. The Coast Guard deliberately kept him out. The State Department and Roosevelt refused to grant these refugees sanctuary. The ship had to sail back to Europe. It landed in Antwerp in June of 1939. The Joint Distribution Committee, International Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, arranged to divide the passengers up. 200 and some went to Great Britain, another group went to Holland, another group to Belgium, another group to France. And of course, when the Nazi juggernaut overran Western Europe in June of 1940, those Jews from the St. Louis in Holland, Belgium, and France were trapped. And of that number, many perished in the Holocaust, especially those in France. Easily marked out, watched, arrested, moved to transit camps, from transit camps loaded into cattle cars, and with the cattle cars shipped across Europe to Auschwitz, which is certain death. I've lost where I was going with this, but the St. Louis, the episode itself, which stands at the center of the whole question of why did the world not do anything? Why were governments shut down to Jewish refugees? Mr. Karliner was a 13-year-old kid on that ship. He's now in his 80s, and he still has his health, and he still has his memory, and he's willing to come all the way from Miami to tell his story about the St. Louis and what he remembers of it. And it's important for us that he do so, because this is the last chance any of us with the museum will have to hear the history told directly by one who participated in it. In addition, as a companion piece to that program, we're inviting my friend Richard Brightman, who teaches at American University in Washington, D.C., who has just published this big, very important book, FDR and the Jews. It's a look at the whole question of the Roosevelt administration and the administration's policies toward the Jews before and during the Second World War. We thus can take, we have the advantage of having a survivor of the St. Louis talk first person, and then a great historian who has published widely on the subject of the Holocaust talk about what his research has told him about the Roosevelt administration and its policy toward the European Jews. The book has already generated a good deal of discussion and some controversy. There are one group of critics who are claiming that it's a whitewash, that he's really just made excuses for FDR and the State Department. And there are people on the other extreme who are saying, well, you know, it's just really raking Roosevelt over the coals for not doing something he didn't have any control over anyway. Anyway, it's important to keep that debate in front of people, and that's a part of what we're about.
Right here. Is there a microphone? Yeah.
This week, the legislature in Arizona passed a law similar probably to the Nuremberg laws, or early versions of them, where it was perfectly okay. It is perfectly okay for anybody in Arizona who thinks a gay person makes them have to do something that's against their own religion, be allowed to do so. And it was only by big pressure from a lot of outsiders that the governor vetoed that law. But don't you think that this man from Florida ought to make a trip to Phoenix and talk to those people? Because you know, they're no better than the Germans discriminating against the group.
Well, I mean, that's not the kind of question you can really answer. First of all, there's not enough of Herbie Carliner to go around. He can't, I mean, if he were going to go to Phoenix, he would need to go to Portland, Oregon, and there are at least 4 or 5 other stops along the way. What I thought was ludicrously hypocritical in all of this was a comment I saw, I think, yesterday, that someone had tried to defend the law in Arizona by saying that, somebody who was Jewish wouldn't want to serve pork. Somebody who was Jewish in a restaurant wouldn't want to serve somebody pork, which had absolutely nothing to do, of course, with what the law is really about. You know, I think the answer is the people who vote for these things are they are trapped by the same sort of limits in their own minds as the people were who voted for the Nazis in 1933 and 34 and 35, when elections were still being held and plebiscites convened to do these sorts of things. The difference between then and now is that we do have a constitution that serves as a powerful backstop against this, and thank God we have federal judges on the bench in all these different places who, one after another, are all saying without hesitation, this is unconstitutional. You can't pass this. You can't do this. And in the end, when it goes to the Supreme Court of the United States, as all of these laws in some sort of omnibus fashion will, the Supreme Court is going to have to say this is unconstitutional. It violates the equal protection clauses of the Constitution. Now, I I kind of hesitate to make blanket moral condemnations of things, and I really don't believe that a law that is as ugly as this one is in the forms that it's been passed in other states as well as Arizona. I really don't think that is as awful as the Nuremberg laws were. There were two Nuremberg laws. There was a law that defined German citizenship by defining who was a Jew. And that law stipulated that if you were a Jew, you were illegally a Jew in Germany if you had one parent or both parents who were Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore you were by definition no longer a German citizen, so you were no longer entitled to the protection of German laws and the German system of courts. And then the second law for the defense of German blood and German honor stipulated that sexual relations between Jews and Germans were prohibited as a felony offense, and it carried penal sanctions with it. The importance of the Nuremberg law, I'm just following up on this since you mentioned them. The importance of the Nuremberg laws were they established the legal basis for persecution in Germany. From September of 1935, when Hitler signed those two decrees into law, it was thereafter legal to do the things to Jews that Germans did do. There was no question of any counter motion that halted the implementation of those laws pending an appeal to a court or anything like that. From 1935 on, it was fair game against the Jews, and the fair game carried with it the full authority of the law. That said, I do believe that some of the more exotically interesting, weird people in the United States do reside in Arizona. Many of them, not many of them, but a number of them went to school with my youngest son at Prescott College in Prescott, Arizona.
This lady in the middle, can you get her a microphone or?
We doing okay?
I hope I can talk with this thing. I've never. I am a survivor of the Holocaust. I was born in France of Hungarian parents, Jewish Hungarian parents. I am 81 years old, and I am a survivor.
You are a living treasure, and your presence here tonight vindicates or affirms, everything that I associate with what I'm doing. And I hope that you have opportunities to tell your story, and I hope especially that you will make the most of those opportunities you may have to tell them to school children.
I have in the past been asked to speak to school children, high school kids, and I have done so.
May I ask, how did you survive?
With difficulty.
Yes. Were you?
My brother, sister, and I were sheltered.
You were hidden?
We were in hiding with a Christian family in the countryside. They were farmers.
Right.
They knew we were Jews. They hid that from the village, the people in the village. We had a German name, Zwillinger was my maiden name.
Yes, ma'am.
They asked us to use their Christian names, and that if we encountered Germans in the village or people we didn't know, to say that we were there because there was no food in Paris and we were hiding.
Sure.
My father was in Bergen-Belsen. He survived.
He survived.
26 members of my family died at Auschwitz. This summer is the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz camp, and I'm planning to go there.
Yes, ma'am. Were you said 26 members of your family?
My family, yes.
Were your family Hungarian? Were
Yes.
they deported from Hungary?
Yes.
Deported in the spring and summer of 1944?
Yes.
In a period of 5 months between the 15th of May, 1944, and about the 9th of August, 437,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered in Auschwitz. Trainload after trainload after trainload, shipped first from the rural provinces of Hungary and the Carpathian Mountains, where Elie Wiesel's family lived, and then finally from Budapest and the larger, the cities that had the largest Jewish communities. 437,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered in this one huge, horrible death factory. But the example you have just described is how most of those Jews who were trapped in France, especially children, were able to survive. They were hidden by Christian families. They became the surrogate children of Christian families. They were told to adopt the names of these families. They were even instructed in how to behave in Catholic or Protestant churches, how to follow the ritual, when to kneel, when to stand, when to sing, all of these things. And they had to do this because no one ever knew who was watching. And there were plenty of collaborators in France, as there were elsewhere, who were more than willing to help the Germans try to hunt down Jews. Thank you for calling this to our attention, and thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may be allowed to...
Yes, ma'am.
Pardon me. You raised the question, how can something like this happen to civilized advanced countries?
Yes, ma'am.
France is the birthplace of liberty, and yet on the night of July the 16th, 1942,
Yeah.
the French police arrested approximately 15,000 Jews, men, women, children, the aged, the infirm, and parked them in an arena where they were kept for 5 days with no food, no water, and then shipped to a holding pen outside of Paris, and then on to Auschwitz. The French police. Jacques Chirac, the French president, who went to Auschwitz for the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, said for the first time ever that France dishonored herself during the occupation.
I think that statement could also apply to other countries who did the same with or against their Jews. With this, and I would argue, with the sole exception of the tiny country of Denmark.
Yes.
And it was almost like every Dane became a rescuer of a Jew rather than turn them over to the Germans. But the most terrible stories of transports involving children are those that involve trainloads of victims from France across Europe to Auschwitz in Silesia. In some cases, a whole trainload of children, which provoked a firestorm of letters inside the SS, the RSHA, in which Eichmann demanded that no further transports of just children be sent, that the children had to be accompanied by adults. Thank you for pointing this out.
We've just about hit full time, but I'd really like to see if there are any Longwood students to get in a question who'd like to ask one before we quit. Yes, sir.
Thinking about the Holocaust, I've always wondered how so many people don't get even more angry. For instance, when I first heard about it, well, let's just say for a while it turned me into a white person who hated white people, and I talked about doing to the Nazis what they did to the Jewish people and all those others in Europe. How do people not get more pissed off and angry about it? Because to not, I would say you would need to have the patience of a saint.
Again, that's the kind of question I'm not sure you can answer. I think,
Sorry, sir.
I think if there's a reason, why we have history, this is one of the reasons, because vengeance would be the much easier and in some respects the much cleaner solution to this problem. And this is what Stalin advocated at the end of the Second World War in a dinner conversation with Roosevelt and Churchill at Yalta. Actually, it was not at Yalta, it was at Tehran in November of 1943, when they first were talking about what they were going to do with the Nazi war criminals at the end of the war. And Stalin suggested, he said, we should just save ourselves a lot of trouble and take from the top down the 50,000 highest ranking Germans in the army, the SS, the government, the judicial system, all the agencies, and just shoot them. And that way we would be reasonably certain that we'd get everybody who deserves to be punished. And true enough, we would probably shoot some innocent people, but when it comes to the Germans, it is better to err on the side of caution than it is on the side of mercy. I think, I mean, there have been times across the years when, you know, I've read accounts, particularly reading original documents or records, particularly German records, where I would find myself obviously in the grip of a rising blood pressure. And I think the document that produced the most anger was an internal memorandum I read that had been written in the spring of 1934 by an SS captain who was then in the office of the SS Security Service, the SSSD. And this is really Heydrich's favorite working place. It's a security service. It's an intelligence service, and it became the key administrative instrument in running the Holocaust. The commanders of the murder squads in the Soviet Union were security police and SD officers who reported to Heydrich. But this document, which is available in English translation in a booklet that's in the title of the booklet is the anti-Jewish policy of the SD, 1934-1939, by the German scholar Michael Wild. And in the memo, which this captain has prepared for a discussion that's going to take place at this conference on how the SS is going to handle the Jewish problem in the coming year, what sort of anti-Jewish measures they're going to impose. The memo says that the long-range policy of the SS with respect to the Jews must be that of making life progressively more and more intolerable, to the point that the German Jew, will finally give up and realize that there's no longer any future for him in Germany, and he will leave. Now, and it goes on to say, at that point, the elder Jews who are too old and too sick or too infirm or too set in their ways or have no family and cannot leave and cannot emigrate from the country, the older Jews will live out their days and die here. And we can tolerate that. We can put up with that. But the younger Jews must be subjected to a consistent and consistently more severe set of restrictions, laws, ordinances, prohibitions that make their life absolutely unbearable. And I mean, there it is. It's a 3-paragraph document of probably less than 1,000 words, and it spells out very clearly what the policy is going to be. In fact, what the policy became for the next 5 years before the war broke out. And this thinking paper, this document from this memo from the spring of '34, then a year and a half later is buttressed, of course, by the Nuremberg laws, which provide the legal underpinning for doing this. What happened to the Jews of Germany in the period between 1934 and 1939 is often not really studied under a microscope to see how and what local life was like. The great historian of the Holocaust, Raoul Hilberg, said it became like government by announcement. And it wasn't just the Nazi government, Hitler, that would issue a decree that Jews can no longer walk on the sidewalk. They must walk in the streets. There actually was such a regulation. It was that regulations that were bombarded upon the Jewish community in Germany, they were issued by the police, by the Interior Ministry, by the Agriculture Ministry, by any number of the agencies and ministries of the Nazi government. And by 1940-41, Jews could not own radios. They had to surrender all their radios. They couldn't own firearms. They couldn't have bicycles. They could only shop in certain stores and at certain times of the day. They had to give up furs and expensive coats that were made from animal fur for the winter campaigns with the troops in Russia in 1941, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it was no Jews could not even own canaries. There was an administrative regulation permitting Jews from having canaries. Their pets, the rest of their pets, had been taken away from them earlier. I mean, the idea is not to avoid becoming angry about this. It's natural to become angry when reading it. the issue is to try to transform the anger into some greater or stronger understanding of what this was about and what the plight of these people were who were subjected, not just to being killed, but to being mercilessly persecuted for years before being killed.
Dr. Sydnor, thanks so much. We have a very small token of appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you all for coming tonight. And I'd like to say a special word of thanks to my friend, President Taylor Reevely, who was kind enough to help put all this together and who has opened a whole new chapter in my excitement about the future of this institution, which I think is going to be great. Thank you, President Reevely, and thank all of you, really, for being here.